You know, I gave a talk here 2 years ago on game design, and I wore a T-shirt, and my mother said, "Michael, you should really dress nicely if you're giving an important talk." So I wore my sweet suit jacket today. So I'm going to be talking about engagement and retention, and I hope everybody's awake. I know it's a long day, probably partied last night, but hopefully we're going to drop some game design knowledge to help you guys keep your users in your game. Okay, so I am the director of product at Roblox. I've been there about 3 years. I run a team called the Game Experience team. Before that, I spent about 20 years in the game industry working on console, PC, handheld. I did free-to-play mobile, a lot of different types of games. And too long of a list, so if you want to look it up, it's on mobygames.com. And I want to kind of jump right in. So here's our agenda. So I'm going to do a quick kind of intro on what engagement retention actually is. I will say that we definitely have different levels of developers in the audience. So some of this stuff you might know, but I think there's probably some tips and knowledge that can benefit everybody, whether you're an experienced developer or kind of a beginner. So we're going to kind of go through the definition, very quick on metrics, and then go into a much longer talk around game design and how you might design your game for great retention and engagement. Before we begin, I went into Roblox and I was able to actually take a screenshot of what bad retention looks like. Or a bad meme, one of the two. But anyway, so let's jump in here. And what is engagement retention? Why is it important? All right. So engagement is all about how much time your players spend in the game, right? So if you think of Roblox, it's a really cool platform. The game streamed down. There's absolutely zero friction to try anything. You just hit the play button, and the game streams to your device, and you're off and running. So that's great for users, but it's hard for you guys because it means there's absolutely zero friction for somebody to jump out of your game and join another. So what I would say is, you know, people kind of vote with their time on the platform, and where they end up spending their time is a really good measurement of how fun or how much satisfaction someone's getting from your game. So key metrics around this, if you want to think about how you measure engagement, is really around total play time. So how much time people are spending, whether it's length of play session or hours per month, et cetera. So that's kind of how you can track that. And what I would say is Roblox, as our key metric for the company, we actually also track engagement. So recently we announced that we had over 1 billion hours of engagement per month. I would say that we are on fire. So we also announced 100 million monthly active users. The great news about that is that as developers, you have more and more people on the platform available to play your game. So this is great. So kind of all boats are lifted by that, which is awesome. So what's retention? This is really around, do players continue coming back to your game, right? So the players that played your game on the very first day, when do they come back? How often? Has it become kind of a regular thing? Is it part of their daily or weekly routine that they play your game? And so some metrics around that are percentage of players come back after a specific time. So if we think about the first day that players play is day 0, then you can measure, do they come back the very next day on day 1 and day 7 or week 1? So these are kind of things you can measure to see out of all the players coming through, how many people are coming back and when do they eventually churn out. Industry standard, so when I was in free-to-play mobile, generally we'd keep something in beta unless we hit a D1 of 40%, and we saw a D7 at 20% and D30 around 10%. So you can kind of take a look at that and decide, hey, you know, if I'm in early access or paid access, when I might want to launch my game, and is my retention good enough? So why is it important to keep players coming back? So really, retention drives, I feel, all of the other key metrics. And I'm going to give you some examples of this. But basically, retention will drive total numbers of users. It's very simple math. If you have more people coming in that are churning out, your game is growing. If you have kind of a lot more people playing your game, the number of hours of your game is increasing. It's a lot easier to actually drive revenue. Obviously, as people play your game more, they're more likely to invest in the game. So you'll drive the lifetime value of your users up. And then once you have a lot of people playing and they're spending more time, you'll start to be more discoverable, right? So as you move your way up the top popular charts, then you're getting lots of organic installs. If your game is visible, it's a lot easier to discover it. You'll get a lot more users coming in. So it kind of steamrolls. So you really want to, kind of think about how you want to create great retention in your game. I'm going to go through this really fast. We're going to post this deck, and so you can kind of study this a little more closely. But basically, this is a theoretical model I built to show retention and how it affects your game. So with everything else being flat, The model is if you add 10,000 people to your game and you look at 3 different games and their retention being kind of at different numbers, you can see the different outcomes. What I mentioned is the industry standard for game A. You can see how much more users they end up with after a year compared to a game with lower retention, even with everything else flat. The reality is, if you do have good retention, you probably also will see more and more users coming into your game, right? Because everything else kind of, you get a lot of momentum. So this also affects your revenue. So if you have, in this theoretical model again, if everything else is flat, and you have an ARPDAU, which is average revenue per daily active user, if that's flat, and for this model, we're going to say it's 10 cents, you can see, based on the retention, the amount of users that you're keeping in your game, how much more money you'll make if you have a game that can retain your users. All right. So this is what it looks like in Roblox. Now, these are not actual numbers. So what I did is I created a baseline. So the average minutes played and retention for games that are between 5,000 and 10,000 users, I use that as a baseline. And you can see how much better the top games perform, right? And so really what this tells you, so for example, the top 5 games on average have 22,000 minutes more played per month than a game that's in the top 5,000 to 10,000, right? And same thing with retention. So you can see kind of much higher percentage, and especially when you go to week 1 retention, right? So you're seeing a much higher retention there. So this tells you that those games are actually very good at retaining their users. Okay, so that was really to convince you this is really important, you should care about it. So now we're going to go into game design and talk about basically how you can do things in your design to help you retain your users. Okay, before though I go into this, I'm going to make a super obvious but important point. Make a fun game. So I'm going to put that aside. We have the world's best developers here at our conference. I'm making an assumption everybody's making a fun game, but obviously if you don't have a fun game, everything else doesn't really work. So just think about your game and think about playing to the strengths of the platform. So things like social interaction, emergent gameplay through the physics simulation, other things. Just make sure that obviously you're making a game that works well in Roblox and is fun. Okay, so we're going to talk about, now you have your fun game, how you might retain your users. So I see a lot of games on Roblox that are awesome games, but they might not do the best job of teaching players what the game is about. So I'd like to talk about that. So really, you need to capture a player's interest very quickly. One thing that happens that I mentioned, because there's no friction to bounce between games, you may have just a couple minutes for somebody to decide I like this game or I don't like this game, right? So somebody pops in, and if nothing else if really cool happens, they might just jump out and try something else. So what I would say is open up with a bang, right? Think about how you're going to open your game. How do you show players the promise of your game and what they can experience? Part of that is include a really incredible opening sequence. So classic RPG problem is I start level 1, I'm wearing a frying pan on my head, I've got my switchblade, I'm in the cellar killing rats. That's not exciting, that's not cool, I'm not really inspired to greatness. So think about how you might tease your content, how you might show what happens later in the game. So so for the RPG example, you could start and you're this warrior and you're somebody else and you go on your top level and you're fighting the big dragon, and then boom, and then you start level 1. Just, you really want to show what the game ends up, the late game looks like. So here's some real world examples. So of something like Bloxburg, there's these really amazing mansions that people build and locations, and so if you can show the users all this great stuff people can build, it'll give them a goal and something to aspire to. Same thing for any of the vehicle type games. So why don't you let the player try to drive the best car in the game first before you give them the old jalopy that goes like 15 miles per hour. Another great game, Elemental Battlegrounds. They have these really amazing over-the-top attacks. They're like screen clearing. Let the user, or make sure the user can see these before they start with the low-level stuff. So think about showing the late game content early. So obviously, there's a lot of debates around tutorials. I think you need to tutorialize, but I don't mean lots of pop-ups. I suggest you tutorialize through interaction. So think about how you can teach your game through having the players, do things. So you want to introduce goals and mechanics early and let them discover them and let them play the key parts of your game. So you want to make sure they're directed just enough so that they're not wandering around and they don't know what to do. I do drop in a lot of games and I'm kind of like, what is going on? And I walk out of the building and somebody kills me immediately and I'm like, what's happening? So in this case, there's some arrows on screen that kind of direct you to where you need to go. So I need to go destroy a building, so I'm very clear there. The other thing is kind of show, don't tell. So have the players actually do the actions rather than bring up a lot of text. If you do need to put some text on screen, have it be passive, right? So kind of have it be an overlay. You don't need to click through because players will just click through as fast as they can. So maybe just kind of a reminder of a light guide so that they can read it if they need it. A game that does a great job of teaching through visual language, it's a classic, Super Mario Brothers. So there is literally 0 text or pop-ups on the screen. I can see on the screen there's some question marks in the blocks. I want to hit those to see what's inside. There's an angry mushroom. It's got a mean face. I know it's bad. So try to also use visual language to teach your game. So the other thing is, if you want to be sneaky, I'm a big fan of having a mission or a quest system. So this is, you can use this as a tutorial in disguise. So players don't actually realize there's this boring tutorial, because what you can do is you can have missions or quests, and they can be optional, but think of it as a list of things that you want the player to do, especially early, right? So you tie them to rewards, so this is some meaningful rewards for doing the actions. And this way you can kind of direct the player to go here or do this action or try this thing, and then you tie rewards to those. But you don't kind of make it heavy-handed where you're kind of taking people through it. So I'm a big fan of doing that. Okay, so goals are really important, right? Goals and challenges and what the player is doing, and rewarding the player for those. So I'm going to kind of go into this. So the goals that you set for the player are super important because the player always needs to feel like they're making progress, right? And that's whether they're playing for 5 minutes or 15 minutes or an hour. The session times can be very different depending if you're on mobile or PC. So you want to think about, can I as a user make progress in a very short period of time? So what I would suggest is set, in your design, set goals for the short, medium, and long term. And so what I mean by that is, if I play the game for 5 or 10 minutes, can I progress at all? Can I earn some currency? Can I get some XP? Can I do something that I feel like is moving me forward, even though I don't have much time? If you do that, you'll find that players are much more likely to come back to your game than some game that, like, I need to set an hour to actually make any progress at all, right? I'm much less likely to play that until maybe I'm at home and I have a huge block of time. So the next thing is set midterm goals. So that's something that I'm striving towards, I'm working towards. Maybe for the week, it'll be something multi-session. Let's say I have a sword I need to upgrade, and need enough currency to do that, or buy something, and that'll take several sessions. But I'm very clear about it, and I know I have that goal. That'll bring people back as well, right? I just need that next unit or that next cool item. And then long-term goals are things like end boss, unlock a whole new area, max out your sword, something like this, open up a really high-end dungeon. So think about something that's also clear to the player that they're striving for, and just make sure that they know about it and they're clear that that's what they're working towards, right? Because you'll just keep people coming back, so they really want to get that long-term goal as well. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So here's an example of a game called Clash Royale. It's off the platform, but it's a really interesting game. They have a very tight core loop. So the core loop is a set of actions that you go through in kind of a repeated fashion that's really fun to do. And so they have a very tight core loop there. So the short-term goal is to fight a battle, get a reward. It's very simple. I can go in and play a game of Clash Royale in 5 minutes. I'm out. I got my chest. I'm good. Midterm goal, so after I kind of get enough of these chests, I get some coinage, I get some cards, I can actually upgrade my cards, my units get stronger. They sneak in a little retention mechanic in there because the reward I get, I actually can't open it right away. There's a timer, and I have to actually set the timer on the chest. And so I'm maxing out my rewards only if I'm coming back multiple times a day to open the chests. Very sneaky. And then my long-term goal, I unlock new arenas, I level up, I win tournaments, I max out all my cards, and it's very clear as a player that you're going through this. Okay, so challenges. I mentioned a little bit before about missions and quests, but I really think challenges are good. So some games I see make a mistake where you have a kind of a really clear set of goals early on, and then poof, I'm out in the world, and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. So so if you can kind of keep your challenges coming and give players a little bit of guidance on what they're supposed to do, it's good. It doesn't have to be heavy-handed. But again, if you have a mission or quest system or even a daily challenge system, it's quite nice. You come back. There's kind of different things you can do. And then also, if you have new features or things you introduce to the game, you can actually put challenges against them so players understand, oh, I want to try this new thing, right? So you tie them to your content. So assuming you're updating your content, once you're out, you can tie challenges to that. So here's some games that do a good job of this, both Hearthstone and Fortnite. So instead of a daily bonus where I just go in and I just click a button to collect currency and I leave, they're very nice systems because I get these challenges every day, and I actually have to, they're interactive. I actually have to achieve something in the game before I get the reward. Also, if I'm not coming back every day, right, the slots fill up, and I feel like I'm missing out because if I'm not getting my daily challenges done, other players are moving ahead of me. Okay, so this ties into rewards. Rewards are very important. Keep them flowing. I'm going to kind of talk about some key things about rewards. So if you can, tie rewards to meaningful things you do in the game, right? You just want to give out stuff willy-nilly. So depending on how hard the challenge is, you want to try to balance your rewards and give obviously bigger payouts for more important things so that the player feels like, yeah, I did this thing and I got this awesome reward for it. The other thing is Daniel will give a great monetization talk if you were here. But one of the things you want to think about is what resource do I want to kind of starve my players so that I create this pent-up demand? So let's say you have a soft currency and you kind of starve the player and you're getting a lot more things you need to upgrade than you have currency for. Well, if you have a challenge that pays out the currency, it's much more meaningful because it's like, yeah, I finally got the reward. I can upgrade my sword. Awesome, right? So think about what you might want to starve or make kind of precious so that there's a lot of demand for that reward. So the other thing is it's really hard to give lots of stuff away constantly. So you can either just give away too much currency and you could blow your economy, or you can give lots of items away. So think about actually itemizing your content. So break things up. So instead of giving that awesome single sword, give like 50 sword shards, and you actually need to collect 50 of them to get the sword. So this allows you to, instead of giving one giant reward all at once, you can actually give up to 50 times the same reward, but the player still feels like they're making progress. So it's a way that, like, instead of, because it's really hard to make infinite amount of content. So think about how you can kind of break that up so you don't drive your designer crazy trying to build too much. The other thing is, in the world, you can kind of hide things, collectibles, hidden objects. So there's certain type of players that love collecting or love exploring. So think about kind of those kinds of things and rewarding that kind of behavior, especially if your game is a lot about exploration. So here's some reward system examples. Loot Drop's great. You see it everywhere. It's super fun and addictive. Diablo kind of crushed it with that. So the idea is that you're constantly dropping things. A lot of it is not useful, and then once in a while you get something that's super useful, and that's fun, and then you could sell the rest, but you're constantly giving out rewards so that the player's always getting something, right? And you're kind of creating that demand. Dungeon Quest does a good job of this as well. So there's like a giant legendary sword. There's people online posting memes and pictures about the next new cool item they release, right? So that's awesome. Another thing I don't see as much is an itemization system, what I kind of mentioned, where you break up the content into pieces. So I'm using an off-platform example here, but a lot of games use this. There's a Star Wars game that's kind of a copy of this game. But this game requires tons and tons of items to level up the character, and you have to do it over a long period of time. And you're crafting, you're combining items. So think about breaking things up if you can, because then you can give out lots of stuff constantly. All right, and if you really want to go nuts, this is a crazy amount of investment here. This is Path of Exile. This is their skill tree. So players that like RPGs and really want to invest some time, you can see there's a lot for a player to want to do there. I don't even understand it personally, but it's awesome. All right, now I'm going to talk about some other things that may seem obvious, but not all games do them well. So Roblox is very much about creativity and about kind of the status of the player and showing things off. So even on the platform ourselves, right, we have our avatar system, so people love showing off their cool creations and how they create their avatars. So think about how you might use that same kind of feeling in your game, whether you're customizing your house, your base, your weapons. Some games have their own character systems. Make sure players can stand out from the crowd and people can easily see when they have something cool. And then if you really want to monetize, you can offer unique items for purchase so people can really stand out. They're premium items. So the other thing is, for games like Theme Park Tycoon, make sure other players can see the cool stuff they're building. So if I make the best theme park in the world, right, make sure other players can see it. I see a lot of activity on Twitter where people are posting their Bloxburg and theme park creations, and they're just amazing. So if your game is appropriate for that type of interaction, it's great, and that keeps players coming back. Okay, so social interaction. So we see that when people play with friends, their retention is much, much higher. It makes sense. So if you want to get a lot of great interaction in your game, think about how you can design a game so that it's really fun to play with your friends, right? So that can either be cooperative or competitive. So there's a game called Tower Defense Simulator. It's doing really well right now. It's a cool game. They have a lobby where everybody can show off all their cool stuff, but then only 4 players go in, and then you play a mission. But it's a co-op mission. And so it's perfect for getting together with friends and playing. So highly encourage, both cooperative and competitive. But think about how players are interacting with your game and how you can support this, because it's been shown to really help retention quite a lot. The other thing is you want to encourage positive behavior. I thought this was really cool. There's a gymnastics game. They actually have a set of rules for how they expect people to behave. And so I really like that aspect. It's a different type of kind of social game. So make sure there's a positive kind of interaction between users. Okay, so we had a great talk earlier about building amazing worlds. I thought it was an awesome talk. It actually touched upon some things that I'm talking about here. So basically, you want to build out your world so that there's always something cool around the corner, right? So one of the strengths of Roblox is 3D, and if your game involves running around, think about your world and think about how you can tell a story through the world, right? If I walk into a town and I see kind of some dead bodies and things and it looks like a massive battle happened, that's telling a story just through the visuals. And think about when I kind of come around this corner after a major battle, some amazing new thing happens, right? So that'll kind of keep players' interest and keep. Now, of course, it's a lot of content to create, but it's definitely worth it. You can also, as I mentioned, hide objects around the world and explore and encourage people to explore. Okay, so these are some classic retention mechanics. So I purposely put these later because I actually think that the core design of your game matters a lot more than like a daily bonus or something. So I just have to bring these up. But some of the things you want to think about. There was a great talk earlier about live ops. So once you're live, it's really important that you have a plan and you think about how you've designed your game and how you can actually continue to build content, right? If it takes 2 years to build your next world or map or so on, you might be in trouble because you might lose all your users by then. So think about before you launch, how you can actually build new content and to make sure that content, if you do have something that kind of catches fire and is big, you can see the guys that built Jailbreak. They built some other games first that didn't hit, but once they hit Jailbreak, and that was a big game, they did a great job of continuing to deliver content. And that's part of the reason for their big success and why they've hung around so long at the top. But other things you can do, you can run special events, double XP weekend, up the odds on loot drops, things like that. So even just like number changes in your game for a weekend were pretty easy. Daily bonus system, I mentioned. Some people like this. It's an easy way to just get people to come back, and if you can string and get a streak going and give better rewards, that's pretty cool. And then appointment mechanics, so these are classics. Doesn't make sense for every game, but there's some farm games that are doing well, and you have to come back after your crops are ready. So basically these are general timers that you have to come back to collect the thing. Another big thing that's fairly recent, besides tournaments, is the season pass. So Fortnite has crushed it there. If you think about it, it's basically you're paying money to earn the right to play to then try to earn rewards. And so it's kind of sneaky in that once I've invested the money, I was like, oh my God, I got to keep playing because I got to then get the rewards because I already paid the money, right? So anyway, that's a super interesting one. One thing I want to say, this is all about design, but don't forget about optimization. So nothing will kill a game like really long loading times. And so I'm going to kind of go through this really quickly, but definitely think about both how fast people can get in and out, how well your memory is optimized. Last talk, Dan showed some graphs on how big mobile is. So it's a massive part of our audience and by far the fastest growing. So if you're not thinking about mobile and you're not optimizing for mobile, you're missing well over 50% of the audience. So make sure you run well on mobile. And that, I just got through, is it. So here's the summary. I hope everybody learned something out of this. When you're designing your game, you really want to think about your opening and how you might want to retain users. Daniel did a great job talking about monetization and progression. That all ties together. And just think about, what'll keep players back, keep coming back. What are the goals you're setting and what are they earning along the way, and how do you keep the game fun over time? So I'll be out in the hallway if you have any other questions, and thanks for hanging out, and We'll talk to you outside.